Jordan is boiling over, demanding revenge. A country united in outrage by the horrifying ISIS video, rallying behind its king.
I'm here to just show where I stand and support for every Jordanian. We all feel the pain.
So far, the video is backfiring, causing revulsion in much of the Arab world.
The world has been waiting for someone, anyone, to take off the gloves and start killing ISIS leaders and their followers. That someone may be the man called the fourth most influential Muslim in the world, a man of peace who has unleashed his dogs of war on those who burned alive a member of his country. Our guest is a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and the former counterterrorism advisor to New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani during the 2008 presidential campaign. Let's welcome Thomas Joscelyn to MidPoint. Thomas, thanks so much for being here today.
Oh, well, thanks for having me.
Have we finally reached the point where we needed to, that someone of power actually in the Muslim world was going to get angry and going to launch some sort of a strike here? We've been talking about America going after them, everybody else. But until we got to this point where the king of Jordan got angry and somebody really in power got angry, nothing serious was going to happen.
Well, it remains to be seen what's going to be done going forward here. As long as there aren't any real competent ground troops or forces on the ground there in Iraq and Syria to clear ISIS out of its strongholds, they're really going to keep consolidating their grip on some of these areas. I mean, if you think about it, the capital of their supposed caliphate is Raqqa, Syria, and that had a pre-war population of more than 300,000 people. And they've been controlling that now for a very long time. And airstrikes alone, whether it be from Jordan or the U.S. or anyone else, really aren't going to be enough to dislodge them from that seat.
Well, understanding that, but here we have King Abdullah now, and we have been waiting for, at least it would seem to a lot of the strategists, we've been waiting for somebody in the Muslim world, somebody of a high rank, to basically come out striking, to come out firing against ISIS, to basically not pull back a little bit and say, wait a minute, we're still part of the Arab world. We can't get out there and take a forward position. The fact that we now have Abdullah out here, will that lead other Muslim leaders, Muslim important leaders, to come out and say it is time for us to gather together as a Muslim nation and go after these killers?
Well, I think you've seen condemnations before of ISIS throughout the Muslim world. The question is whether that's going to actually match any kind of real behavior or sort of tactics that are really going to take the fight to ISIS in a way other than airstrikes, other than intelligence operations, that sort of thing. Right now, I don't see it. I mean, Jordan has an armed forces of about 88,000, I think is one estimate I saw in their army. They certainly have military capability to get into this fight, but I don't think they're going to. I think they're going to continue to basically support airstrikes. They're going to crack down on ISIS inside Jordan, and they have one of the best intelligence services in the region. They're going to continue to use that. But again, that's all far short of sort of introducing the sorts of boots on the ground you need to really dislodge them from their strongholds.
So then do you think that this was, on ISIS's part, a tactical mistake, or in your estimation, did they get it right? And was this simply just the next line of attack that they would take and make sense?
I think there are two levels to this. I mean, on one hand, basically what ISIS really is they've really carved out their niche within the jihadist world of basically being the extreme of the extreme. So basically, even within the extremists, they're extreme. And sort of they get a lot of the hotheads within the jihadist world. Young recruits are sort of attracted to this sort of thing. I think they were getting those sorts of people before anyway, and I don't know that this is going to help them get more of that type of person. But when it comes to translating that into mainstream popularity inside the Islamic world, the Muslim majority world, these types of acts tend to backfire against them. What's interesting is that al-Qaida has built up all sorts of jurisprudence and their own logic on this sort of thing where, they don't care about the Jordanian pilot. They would kill him as well. But the bottom line is they don't believe that this sort of grotesque video really helps the jihadist cause in the long run. So even within the jihadist world, the more sophisticated jihadis, still ultra-violent, still really morally reprehensible in every way, even those types of people have really objected to this sort of grotesque video because they think it hurts their ideology in the long run because it doesn't help them get more of the mainstream population.
30 seconds, Ed, before we take a break. What then, in your estimation, will galvanize the Muslim world leaders in order to put themselves in a position where they decide to take their nations, their governments, and their combined militaries and go after this threat?
Well, one of the things that's needed is there needs to be a real effort, probably led by the U.S., to really support the tribes in both the eastern part of Syria and the western part of Iraq to fight ISIS and other jihadists. And that really is something the U.S. did before at the height of the surge. against al-Qaida in Iraq, which is the mother organization for ISIS. That sort of effort is needed again now, and that's probably going to have to be led by the U.S., not by nations throughout the Gulf.
So once again, no matter how we slice it, the United States has got to be at the forefront of this fight. Okay.
Without U.S. leadership, no one leads.
Okay, hold tight for just a couple of minutes here. Once, and it wasn't that long ago, America was a nation striking out at enemies, in part because of national pride. That concept could be at work again in the Middle East. That could be part of the turning point in the war against ISIS and their fellow terrorists. We'll discuss that and much more when we continue right here on MidPoint, where we question everything. Tribal and national pride have come to bear in the war against terror. Let's welcome back to MidPoint the senior editor of the Long War Journal, which deals in counterterrorism and related issues, senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, Thomas Joscelyn. Tom, when we get down to these actual reasons why people would fight, and we talk about the tribal loyalties, the national loyalties, does any of that make any difference whatsoever in trying to drive some sort of front against ISIS, that the tribes themselves in the Middle East would rise up and create some sort of effort, or are we just sort of thinking that might work and it really isn't a big part of the whole idea?
Oh, actually, it's a huge part of the whole idea. I mean, if you look at what ISIS has had to do, the resistance they've met on the ground has primarily come from powerful tribes both in eastern Syria and western Iraq. In fact, just 2 days ago, one of the heads of one of the leading tribes in western Iraq called for the formation of something called the League of the Virtuous, which is sort of their new sort of entity. Basically, it's very similar to the Sons of the Awakening that we saw during the height of the Iraq surge, to take on ISIS, which is, again, is the sort of the descendant of al-Qaida in Iraq, which the tribes fought beforehand. But we've seen the same thing in Syria. You know, one of the more powerful tribes in eastern Syria, the Shebat, they basically have gotten slaughtered by ISIS because they weren't properly armed and had stand up. But they've got thousands upon thousands of members who are willing to fight ISIS. And yet, late last year, we found what was found was a mass grave of about 700 members of their tribes who basically had to be executed by ISIS because they were such a problem for them. So there is very much a tribal revolt against ISIS. The problem is that there haven't been the right authorities in place to basically nurture and cultivate that revolt and also arm them to really take on ISIS in a way that can defeat them.
Then how do we use that tribal feeling here? How does the U.S., and if we are to put ourselves in a forward motion here and in a leadership motion in the other nations, how do we use that to our advantage then to really try to put ISIS in check?
Well, you know, I objected to the complete withdrawal of American forces from Iraq in 2011. I thought some forces needed to stay behind, probably in the tens of thousands, maybe 25,000 troops, mainly special forces, to basically keep these tribal relationships going. I don't think the administration fought for a real status of forces agreement that would have allowed for that to happen, and they were very happy to basically leave Iraq. That was a big mistake. But right now, I think there's still some political appetite in Iraq. I think that we basically could inject more forces, American forces, into Iraq. I'm not talking about 250,000 troops or anything like that, but you could have about 25,000 troops who would make a big difference, basically rekindling these old tribal alliances and providing them the type of logistical, tactical support that they really need on a day-to-day basis, and also intelligence to really take the fight to ISIS and kick them out of Anbar and elsewhere.
Tom, we are featuring at the top of the Newsmax website right now the ideas and the concepts of a new book, which is called ISIS Inside the Army of Terror. Here's a quote from the book, or at least an idea from the book, that the Islamic State group has learned from the mistakes of past jihadist movements and established a near impregnable base of support within Iraq and Syria with spectacular appeal to many of the world's Sunni Muslims. Do you agree or disagree?
Well, I think that ISIS has a stronger military capability than previous jihadist groups, and that's really its strength. It's tactically, from a military perspective, it's far superior to a lot of the groups we've seen in the past. But actually, I think the idea that they've learned from the mistakes of jihadists in the past and have improved upon it is actually wrong. I think they're repeating a lot of the mistakes that have been made in the past, going all the way back to the 1990s in Algeria. And in fact, you know, again, I think within the jihadist world, if you look at what al-Qaida says about this, and they're a much more sophisticated strategic adversary, unfortunately, than we like to give them credit for. If you look at what al-Qaida says about this, they've gamed this out, and they realize that ISIS is not building sort of the deep popular support it needs to last in the long run. Now, ISIS in the short run has been making up for that with a superior military capability, and we'll see how long that keeps going. I mean, they're certainly a formidable adversary. They're much stronger in terms of taking the fight on a day-to-day basis than we've seen in the past from a lot of groups, but they still have weaknesses and mistakes.
The president is asking Congress for the authorization for the use of military force against the Islamic State group. He is renewing his call for this. He doesn't want to put boots on the ground, but he doesn't want the authorization to preclude the possibility out there. Do you think he's setting it up perhaps for the next president if he gets this okay?
Yeah, I mean, I think that their approach for a long time at the National Security Council level and the president has been to basically, they know that these problems are really becoming larger and larger, that jihadism is spreading, and they've tried to basically not deal with it in a holistic way. What they want to do is use pinprick strikes like drone strikes, air strikes, that sort of thing, to try and contain it or to hit key leaders here and there. But they don't really want to roll it back because they know that that takes a lot of effort and a lot of resources. Unfortunately, the enemy gets a vote, and just because we're not willing to engage them in a broad fight doesn't mean that they're not willing to engage in a broad fight, and that's what we're seeing.
About 15 seconds. Do you think we're winning at all?
No. We're taking out key leaders here and there. There was a drone strike in Yemen in late January. It took out a key leader, for example. We see that time and time again. But the thing is that the jihadis know that that's what we want to do, and they've built in redundancies to basically survive that.
There you go. It's all part of a longer plan. Thomas Joscelyn, thanks so much for joining us. I do appreciate it, and we'll talk again very soon.
Thanks a lot.
All right. The man who may next lead American defense believes Iran is as or more serious a threat to this country than ISIS. It is time to get a reality check here, because still, no matter how hard we focus down on ISIS, there are still those out there who still want to take out America, Israel, and anybody else they deem not worthy of themselves. And that, of course, is Iran. So much more to come as we continue right here on MidPoint.